Hello again. Welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
And I'm their friend and guest, Alan Singer.
Dr. Alan Singer, educator historian, once again with Media Watch, virtual regular, which is good because his expertise is always valued. We're taping the Thursday before our Monday air, brought to you by EVT Educational Productions, Zoom, and hopefully will air on Manhattan Neighborhood Network next Monday.
I believe their streams are back up, Eric, so I think we'll be on MNN.
Who knows? Fingers crossed. But within the context of what's going on in the globe, the world, locally, jump off with the turmoil and ferment in academia and the educational world, because it actually bears a significant bearing on the real world. Which one of these stories should we jump off with?
Well, why don't we start with the decline of the history profession, because that'll lead into all the others.
Okay.
You had some great quotes on that.
Yeah, actually, Bob, that story that I came across, this New York Times opinion piece, which I sent to you guys. Bob, if you got it handy, jump with it.
Yeah, I'll cue it up as I speak, but it's a good piece in the New York Times, written by a historian. As soon as I can pull it up here on the screen, here we go. I almost have it, but it talks about the decline of the of historians, the history profession, history professors with tenure, and it just talks about how this is we're losing a lot of the good, the research, the factual research that we used to get out of history historians. I remember when I was at Columbia University, it wasn't until I graduated that I realized I learned from some of the greatest historians in the US, like Ken Jackson, who wrote one of the best histories of the city of New York. Mm-hmm. But we're losing that. They're not getting tenure, they're not getting respected. And let me just pull out a quote from this New York Times opinion piece by, let's get his name, Daniel Bessner. He's a historian. I'll get his credits a little bit later. And it says in the middle of his piece, entire areas of our shared history will never be known because no one will receive a living wage to uncover and study them. It's implausible to expect scholars with insecure jobs to offer bold and innovative claims about history when they can easily be fired for doing so. Now, that opens up our discussion, which we'll soon follow up, about school districts banning books, states banning programs because they discuss slavery, just trying to rewrite history to fit their political package. No. By losing the historians, we're giving into this crap. So, and it provides a good jump off point for our discussion here.
This is the culmination of a long process that's really I got my doctorate in the 1970s at Rutgers in history. And I opted to teach high school because there were no college jobs. And so what happened, because there were no college tenure track jobs, not only you didn't have people even going into the doctoral programs, because what would be the point? I think they estimate that maybe 30% of the people who have complete a doctoral program in history actually get a job in the university teaching history. And right. That is and that's with a lot fewer people. People used to say to me, well, you have a PhD, why are you teaching social studies at Franklin K. Lane High School? And I said, well, look, this is my options. I could teach social studies at Franklin K. Lane High School and live in Brooklyn and have a career and an income, support a family, or I could start chasing positions at community colleges in Lincoln, Nebraska at a fraction of the salary. And today, more and more people are just adjuncts. They can't get full-time jobs.
Yeah.
And my degree is in history. It's only a bachelor's, but I treasure my degree because it's been useful in my journalism career to dig out facts and separate them from opinion. And when we lose that type of when we don't pass that on, as you did, to high schoolers, which is a great thing, you got to learn that early. You got to learn to look up facts early. Then it affects what they evolve into. If this is a TikTok, Twitter, Facebook generation that doesn't really always go for the facts. Historians, we need facts, and
Yeah.
that's what we're losing.
Well, one of the interesting things about the liberal arts disciplines, especially history, is that it gives you a perspective, a global perspective, and a historical perspective of, what the old saying is, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. so jump in, Alan, with the continuing push to sanitize history that we're seeing across the country. Let's start with our favorites. They used to be Florida man. Let's just start with Florida, the state of Florida. Please jump, because this is front and center for what we're arguing the problem is.
Florida has launched a full-scale attack on history as part of its campaign against critical race theory.
Mm-hmm.
The College Board, which organizes advanced placement courses and tests, has proposed a new course on African American history. And it needs to field test the course and the test to make sure it reaches their standards.
Mm-hmm.
Florida announced it was banning the teaching of the AP African American history course in Florida schools because, of course, that would expose students to beginning to study about slavery, racism, injustice, which are banned in Florida because they're pretending if we don't teach it, it didn't really happen.
Yeah, right.
And then, but Florida, again, this is just an assault on one level. They brought in a Republican senator from Nebraska, Brent Sass, to really tighten on the university, all public colleges in Florida. They have to defend what they're teaching. There was one experimental college which they're going to shift from its mandate of being experimental, and they're going to shift it to being more traditional. But again, it's an assault on the history. Again, if we don't teach it, it didn't happen, and that's Florida. But unfortunately, it's not just in Florida.
Right.
Harvard rescinded an offer at the Kennedy School to the former director of the Human Rights Watch, because their organization was critical of the Israeli occupation of Palestine and the treatment of Palestinians.
Yeah, but dig into that a little bit more, because what I liked about that story when it came across my inbox was this one dean, Elmendorf, whatever his name is, just said there's a perception that Human Rights Watch, or there may be a perception that Human Rights Watch was anti-Israeli or anti the state of Israel. And so to avoid that perception, he was going to rescind, well, the offer had been made. So the offer to Dr. Roth, Professor Roth, the former Human Rights Watch director, and the faculty at the Kennedy School just rose up in arms. Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about the pushback from inside academia about this potential donor influence rescinding of the offer.
No, donor influence is exactly the point. That what they backed off the offer because they were afraid they would lose money, not because what he said, what he did, or what the organization did in any way was illegitimate. Mm-hmm. They are not anti-Israel, but they have been very critical of the treatment of Palestinians in the occupied territory.
Right.
They're the Human Rights Watch. That's what they're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, history is always going to be a function of the historian. I mean, there's always going to be a bias somehow. As best as I might do to write a history of something, there's going to be my bias in it. Being able to accept, but some bias, some opposite opinion is important if you're going to teach history, and to reject a candidate over the danger of losing money, even though his track record is as bona fide as anyone who could have been appointed to that position, is just scary. That they would withdraw it. So yeah, Alan, it's
that donor influence issue is key, because part of the article talked about the University of Washington sending back a $5 million gift from a donor, because the donor wanted to add a caveat that any professor that was supported by that gift could not express any, quote, anti-Israel sentiments in their teaching. And so the University of Washington said, thanks, but no thanks. Keep your $5 million, because they did not want to be putting any academic restrictions on their teaching staff. And the fact that Harvard, this one person at Harvard thought that he had to worry about the possibility of anti-Israel bias, from Human Rights Watch, who basically try their best to just look at the facts, deal with the laws. And the quote from Roth was, we were looking at the legal aspects of that type behavior. We weren't calling them an apartheid state. We were saying that Israel's, in its actions and activities that were going on in parts of the occupied territory, they legally fell under what had been defined as apartheid type behavior. And so we needed to condemn that, and we did so in no uncertain terms, even though we knew that doing that was going to open us up to all kinds of charges of anti-Semitism and anti-Israeli. But they were gutsy enough to say, we need to make this ruling, because that's what's going on. Now, we've had this discussion on Media Watch before, when we have come down on Israel for Israel's behavior. And so we fully understand what human rights is talking about, what Human Rights Watch is talking about, because, people keep saying, well, you guys are not that often, but there's been noises about, y'all don't treat Israel correctly. Yes, we treat Israel as correctly as we try to treat the Palestinians. And the Palestinians get actually no media coverage. They get so little media coverage, it's just unbelievable. And we used to call that out quite a bit back in the day. So anyway, what else in the educational firmament? There's lots of stuff we need to talk that deals with real world applications.
The other big one recently was in Hamlin College, which is a small liberal arts college in Minnesota. An art history professor was looking at medieval art with her students and showed a Islamic painting. It was an Islamic painting from Persia of the angel Gabriel dictating the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad.
Okay.
Now, in Islam, you're not supposed to have portrayals of the Prophet Muhammad, of Allah, and that's seen as sacrilege.
Okay.
Now, the professor, who was an adjunct, was aware of this concern. So before she showed the image, which again was done by Islamic artists from Persia, he alerted the class what they would be looking at and said, if someone would be offended by seeing this image, they could leave. No student got up and left. No student said, no, this is offensive, don't do it.
Right.
However, after she showed the image, one of the students complained to the president of the university, and the president of the university declared that her academic freedom should be trumped by respect for diversity, and she was terminated as an adjunct at this college.
That is totally screwed up. What's any pushback on that?
Oh, yes. Joan Scott, who is a professor emeritus, former head of some of the major historical organizations in the United States, she wrote a response, which the History News Network covered. And what she said was that this was not an issue of diversity versus academic freedom. This was an issue of religious censorship of what students have a right to learn about.
She's correct.
Scott made it very, very clear that the student had the right not to see the image if it violated their beliefs.
Right.
And the professor did the right thing by alerting students to this, follow the diversity guidelines.
Yes.
But what this student and what the university president were doing is they were empowering anybody to censor what everybody gets to learn.
Yes.
And if this becomes precedent, you could have a student who disagree with evolution, saying we can't learn about evolution in our classes. You could have a student who believed that the earth was created 7,000 years ago, not permitting geology to be taught, not permitting astronomy to be taught. You could have a student, a religious Christian, who didn't want the Crusades to be covered, or Christian religious groups, their involvement in genocide. So
I think there should be some kind of legal action taken on behalf of this adjunct professor, because that's an illegal, unlawful termination, I would think, based on her, basically how she handled the situation. She did absolutely nothing wrong. So how can she be fired for doing the correct thing for everyone, including the religious individuals who she said, get up and leave if this is against your religion, because I do not want to offend you? Why should she be fired? It was a female adjunct professor? No, she should not have been fired. This is bogus stuff.
This gets back to the first issue about college professors now are all adjuncts, not full-time tenure track.
Yes.
If she was full-time tenure track, she would have rights. As an adjunct, she's very, very vulnerable. Essentially, what they did is they decided not to renew her contract.
Yeah, I'm just saying that she needs a good pro bono lawyer. That's what I'm saying. Because she can't afford to go up against that university with no pocketbook, right? But the principal should be bringing some serious legal people to bear, from like the ACLU or somebody, to fight for a principle that if this is allowed, all those issues that you just raised, Alan, that's just the next step. We're going to be even worse off if they let that school get away with that.
I agree with you, Eric, that she needs some backup. But, as Alan was explaining, as an adjunct, you're really like, you're really out there. Not renewing a contract isn't the same as firing. I mean, it's just they're not offering. But I get your point.
They made a statement, correct? Alan, what was the statement? She had violated the religious freedom of. So once they make that statement,
you can go after it.
You can go after them. If they hadn't said anything, then they could just say, "Oh, we just didn't want to renew her." But they came out with a public statement for why. And so a good lawyer is going to, or has a good chance of nailing them, and somebody should try for real.
We need the AAUP, the Association of University Professors, the American to take a stand and say that what Hamlin did is unacceptable, and basically put them on, under some kind of boycott action.
Yeah, that could be, but those bureaucratic organizations, they're not going to go out on a limb.
Oh, they have censored colleges. And they could call on the full-time faculty to go on strike, to boycott, and they could pay for the lawyers.
Okay, that would be nice if they would pick up that baton and run with it. Okay, all right. So with whatever time we have left, what else are we dealing with on academia that has real-world consequences? Because this GPT. All right, here we go.
Bob,
explain to our viewers the GPT chat box brouhaha.
Well, I mean, it's been in the news a lot. This computerized system that basically can answer questions and give back responses as if a human wrote it. So it's called Chat GPT, invented by a company called OpenAI. Open Artificial Intelligence is what it
In
stands for.
essence, Bob, they're using this AI to write their essays and hand it in as if they've done it themselves. Is that
Well,
it?
yes. I mean, the system is like, it's absorbed massive amounts of data, and they've been able to crunch it so that you can give a natural English question, and it'll give you a full English response in full, conversational form. So I asked it, for example, let's see if I can pull it up really quickly, why the Brooklyn Dodgers, well, I won't even go to the exact text. Why did the Brooklyn Dodgers, leave Brooklyn? And it gave a good logical explanation. It was a combination of the city didn't want to give money to condemn land. They wanted a bigger, a modern venue. LA offered a lot of money. And it said at the end of the response that Brooklyn Dodger fans were angry and over this, and it was very controversial. So actually, it was a very good paragraph, very well done.
That's an essay answer right there.
Yeah, I could have handed that in, and it would have been a legitimate good answer. It only made one mistake. It called Brooklyn a city, which it's not. Hasn't been since 1898.
Right.
But that's another thing. But yeah, this system can give natural responses, and for a student, if one of Alan's students unfortunately could use the system to write an essay, and that's the danger. So that's massive amounts of data, but what data? And there's the problem.
So, Alan, what are your colleagues doing about this, Alan?
Well, first, I did something similar as Bob, and they gave Bob a paragraph. But if you then ask a follow-up question, so if you ask a series of follow-up questions based on the paragraph, you will get an entire report.
So if I would have asked, was it Walter O'Malley's fault? And
yes.
It would have.
What did Los Angeles give the Dodgers?
Okay.
What was the reaction in New York City?
Mhm.
What role did airplanes play? Because they couldn't have done it until they had the development of the jet plane. Before the Dodgers and Giants moved to the West Coast, the farthest west team was Kansas City, Missouri, because that was the end of the railroad lines.
Yeah, so you could have fed in, but how was it economically feasible for them to move out there? And then they would say, well, it wasn't until they convinced the New York Giants to move to San Francisco, and then it became economic. That you would get that back from the chat box. But aside from all this, what are your colleagues in academia trying to do to combat this, Alan? Because kids, I saw part of the story where one kid said, I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to have the AI take this test for me. And he didn't plan to do any essay writing. He was just going to feed this stuff into the chat box and let them send it back.
We're actually having a discussion on this at Hofstra next week on Wednesday, when faculty are talking about innovative teaching. And one of my colleagues is going to be discussing that. And I was interviewed for a Newsday article, which should come out soon, on the issue. And one of the things that I've said is I don't like this Chat GPT because it eliminates thinking. And that the key thing, and Bob, you talked about this when you said, though you're a journalist, you learned in history class how to gather information and analyze it, evaluate it, and draw your own opinions. Chat GPT eliminates that whole process of thinking. It invalidates learning.
Now, I saw some, Alan, based on that, I'll tell you, one of the pushbacks I got from one of the professors in the article I read was this professor said, you know what, we can't put this genie back. We need to figure out a way to use it in our teaching. His plan was basically to say, all right, part of your critique on this topic is, what would an artificial intelligence do for an answer to this topic? And then once we see the AI's answer, then you, the student, tell me where the artificial intelligence was wrong. What did that artificial AI chat, whatever, GPT screw up on? And what is your take on how well this essay was written? And so they still have to think if you incorporate the AI as part of the test, right?
Yes. One of the things that on a simple essay, what you could just ask, what are the implications of these ideas for today? So they may have seen the analysis somewhere else, but they have to be prepared to discuss the implications.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I do in my class, and I've always done this, is one, there are a whole series of steps you must follow before you submit a research paper. First, you have to select and defend your topic. Then you have to provide a list of the sources you're going to use. Then you have to have an outline of your topic. Then you're going to present your ideas in class. Then you're going to write a draft, and then you're going to do your final essay. And unless you follow all the steps, you can't just submit the final essay at the end.
Okay.
So
I mean, the important thing is to make the students think. I mean, if they do that, even if they use the AI, they have to find the source, they have to do the research. And we have about a minute and a half left.
Okay, one last point. I was doing some work. You mentioned, what was the name of the organization, Bob, that developed this product?
OpenAI.
One of the founders of OpenAI and one of its investors was Elon Musk. I think we're going to change his name to Enron Musk.
Yes, yes, that's just another rabbit hole we don't have time to go down.
Oh, how about that? So one thing we should delve into real quick, debt ceiling actually today where we're taping is the D-Day supposedly, but Janet Yellen, Treasury, says she'll shift some stuff around. Hopefully she'll keep us from defaulting between now and June. But the megalomaniacs that are in the House will probably still try to hold the budget and the debt ceiling hostage. So any predictions, or what do you think?
I guess we'll have to cover that later because we have about 20 seconds.
Okay, so we thought it out to our viewers to be addressed later.
Yes.
This has been Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony. Catch up to us on YouTube on Media Watch EVT.
And I'm the guest and friend, Alan Singer. Thank you very much for having me.
And we'll catch you the next time, folks. Stay safe.